Good evening, everyone. And for those of you in the audience, some of you may be in the US, so good afternoon, if that's the case. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Professor Eugene Finkel to give our talk today. He has come to Bologna for the next 2 years, so we're delighted to welcome him, at least 2 years, and we're delighted to welcome him to our faculty here in Bologna. He works at the intersection of political science and history and works to promote a better dialogue between the two disciplines. He was born in the Ukraine and grew up in Israel and did his BA in political science and international relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and went and did his PhD in political science at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. No doubt he went there for the wonderful winter weather that they have in the Midwest. His research focuses on how institutions and individuals respond to extreme situations, violence, state collapse, and rapid change. He has been the author of a number of books, most recently co-authored Stock Gelbach, Reform and Rebellion in Weak States, published by Cambridge University Press in 2019. And then also he's author of Ordinary Jews, Choice and Survival During the Holocaust, which was published by Princeton University Press. He's also published a number of articles in some top political science journals. So Evgeny, let me say officially how delighted we are to have you in residence here in Bologna, and let me turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. And I'm really delighted to be here. So what I'm presenting today is a part of a much broader project that I'm working on together with David Giacconi, who is a professor at George Washington University back in DC. We started this project even before COVID hit, so this is actually the first time I'm presenting it to real people, real audience. So I'm quite excited despite all the problems with technology that we had. So what we try to do in this project is to try to figure out how authoritarian regimes, how autocracies behave when they're with the back to the wall. And this project is continuation of what I do my entire career, trying to understand the politics of extreme situations, how people and institutions respond to existential crisis. So, as you probably saw from Professor Plummer's introduction, I do mostly historical work. Now, the question that might reasonably be asked is, why do we need a historical work, and especially a very specific type of historical work? Quantitative historical work, something along the lines of economic history. Why do we need it in a policy school? Well, for several reasons. First, history is fun, and I'm certainly enjoying what I'm doing very much. But more importantly, historical cases are useful to understand the contemporary world, and for several reasons. First, we usually know how the story ended, so we can make some pretty good inferences, and we will never be proven wrong if we predict something, unlike people who work on contemporary stuff. Second, the data is actually quite more extensive and more widely available when we know how the story ended, and especially if it ended many years ago, and people were writing about, by and large, cannot tell us how wrong we are in our inferences. Footnotes cannot talk back. But more importantly, if done correctly, I think the past provides us with analytically important insights about the present. And it's not just history that the history repeats itself, it doesn't. And history also never offers easy and clear-cut policy recommendations. Rather, it gives us the analytical toolkit to understand the present and to appreciate complexity, and also to avoid the arguments about how unique or unprecedented the current moment or the current crisis or the current situation is. So doing historical work won't give us all the answers and prescriptions, but it will help us ask better questions and see things as processes rather than events, detached from broader contexts. So what kind of questions we ask in this project by using history? today I'm presenting only just one part of it. But what we try to understand, as I said, is how autocracies operate during crisis. And autocracy is by far the most common, the most prevalent regime throughout human history. But we actually know surprisingly little about autocratic governance, especially below the top elite level. And that's what we try to focus on. And more specifically in the research that I will be presenting today, in this part of the project, we will focus on arguably the biggest challenge that non-democratic rulers have: how to promote subordinates, how to promote agents, and based on which criteria. Because unlike elected leaders, autocrats have a dilemma. They want to stay in power, and usually, the longer the better, but they also want to get things done. And the policies, the stuff that they care about might differ. Some autocrats may value economic growth. Some want to have an effective repressive apparatus or an army. But still, someone needs to get out and do all those things. And here is the crux of this dilemma. Authoritarian leaders might promote the best and the most capable agents, those who actually get the stuff done. But it's dangerous, because those most capable leaders might at some point decide that they want to become the rulers themselves and launch a coup. The solution, of course, is to promote only those who the leader trusts. Relatives, people who come from the same region, from the same ethnic group, from the same clan, from the same party, you name it. That definitely reduces the danger of a coup. But those people might not be the most skillful and the most meritorious, so they will not achieve the best results. And then instead of a coup, an autocratic leader might face a revolution. So this is the dilemma that we try to deal with and to answer. Now, quite a few scholars, political scientists, economists, sociologists, historians, try to answer this question and try to see how authoritarian leaders actually solve this dilemma. And the jury is by and large still out. Some argue that autocrats promote those whom they trust, regardless of their competence. Others argue that merit trumps everything else, and they just promote those who are the most capable, regardless of their origin and who they are. But those arguments, well, they suffer from several key weaknesses. First, most of this research tends to focus just on several cases. About 90% of that is contemporary China. And the rest is Nazi Germany plus some Putin's Russia. Second, there is an assumption that the main danger, the main threat to an authoritarian leader is an elite coup. But there are also quite a few situations in which the survival of an autocrat depends not so much on a small elite of top leaders, but on the much larger sections of the state apparatus. Think about the military during a war, or the police during mass protests, or even first responders during a natural disaster or a health crisis. And we know surprisingly little about how those lower level members of the state apparatus are being evaluated and promoted. And finally, the biggest issue with all those arguments is how exactly you measure merit and performance. Now, a typical argument would look, say, at levels of economic growth in the Chinese province, or turnout in Russian elections, so the number of protests, and use it as a proxy for the merit, for the capabilities, for the skills of the local leaders. But of course, there are also many other things that might affect economic growth or protest or performance that no leader, no matter how capable they are, can control. So what's the solution? Well, I will tell you in a moment. That's exactly the solution that we're trying to propose, to see how autocracies evaluate and promote officials below the top elite levels, and especially when those lower level officials matter the most, soldiers during wartime. And luckily, for quite a few groups of soldiers, we have clear performance indicators. So think snipers. The number of people you killed is your performance indicators, and it can be quantified. Now, in this piece, we focus on the most elite category of soldiers for whom we have performance indicators, fighter pilots. Because first of all, they're commissioned officers, so they're pretty well-positioned members of the state apparatus rather than, say, snipers who rank and file. Second, it's also a very high visibility and high prestige group in any society. They are members of the elite, and the elites, the top elites, certainly do care about fighter pilots as a group. Think about any propaganda film from any military or from any society during wartime. They will have the top guns flying somewhere up in the air, shooting down enemy planes. So they're very visible. And it's also, we think about fighter pilots as mostly, people who engage in heroics and brave and courageous and very powerful, and that's absolutely true. But it's also a very technically sophisticated job that requires years of formal training, like any bureaucrat does. And they need to follow the rules, like any bureaucrat does, because otherwise they will not survive. And most importantly, they have pretty clear performance indicators. The job of a fighter pilot is to shoot down enemy planes from the air. So how fighter pilots are being promoted when it matters the most. Here we look at the Red Army aviation during World War II. And the choice, of course, is clear. The Soviet government during World War II could have promoted fighter pilots who performed the best, regardless of who they are. Or they could promote those who belong to the in-group. Now, there are several in-groups here that can be preferenced. First of all, the ideological in-groups, members of the Communist Party. And if you know anything about the Soviet Union, it was a one-party state. So, and membership in the Communist Party was crucial for promotion. So we might expect that those who do carry the Communist Party membership card will get preferences in promotion. Another in-group is an ethnic group, ethnic Russians, or those who are close to them, like Ukrainians or Belarusians, rather than the minority pilots. So our expectation is that those who belong to, the in-group, either party in-group or ethnic in-group, will get preferential treatment, will be promoted at higher rates than those who do not, than those who are not communists or those who are not Russians or Slavs more generally. So what did we do in our research? Now here I want to stop for a moment and thank the Russian Ministry of Defense. I never thought I would say those words, but here we are. And this is why. Putin's Russia heavily uses the Soviet victory in World War II for domestic legitimacy reasons, because frankly, they haven't got anything else. It's either that or naked repression. And as part of the effort to make victory in World War II the dominant national idea, the Russian government created a huge website that has literally millions and millions of Red Army World War II era documents. Personal files, unit file reports, you name it. Now, of course, it wasn't done for people like me, Western researchers. It was done for people who live in Russia or former Soviet Union to search for their relatives, for their ancestors who fought in the war. They would go there, they would search their names, they would see their awards, they would see their service record. That's how I came to this website, to look up my grandparents' wartime record. But then, of course, after I was done with this genealogical quest, the social scientist in me woke up and started kicking and screaming and that we need those data. So my co-author who does data science and I just scrapped all of it. And now we're sitting at between 7 to 8 million files. It will require several lifetimes to go over those. Another outcome of this interest in World War II is the huge number of new publications, including quite a new encyclopedia, is completely unbiased, completely neutral about different aspects of the Soviet effort in World War II. One of those, let me show you the cover here in a moment. Okay, it's called All Stalin's Aces 36, 1953. It covers not only World War II, it starts with the Spanish Civil War and ends with Korea, but of course the bulk of it is World War II. And it has biographic information on about 3,000 top performing Soviet fighter pilots. So the inclusion criteria is at least 5 so-called individual confirmed victories In other words, all fighter pilots who downed more than 5 enemy planes, in that case, mostly German, although some Italian and Romanian planes, would go into this encyclopedia. In the Q&A, I will be more than happy to talk about the data, about how those victories were coded, how reliable the data are. But just to give you a sense, that's how a typical entry from this encyclopedia looks like. I translated it to English. So that's one pilot entry that we have here. What we have the name, we have the date of birth, rank at the beginning and the end of the service, the unit, the plane, but most importantly, the list of victories. So the list of planes that this specific pilot, Vladimir Plavsky, shot down, including the date, whether it's individual or in a group. So if you see, like say 1-4, it means that the group of 4 Soviet pilots downed 1 German plane and each got a quarter of a victory. So the place and the type of the German plane that they downed, the awards, and the end of their service, in which case Plavsky was killed in aerial combat. So we coded all of those, about 3,000. And then went to the data set and looked those people up. Took their personal files, all their data, and by the standards of historical research, the data is amazingly complete. We had less than 10% missing data. And we tried to see how those people were evaluated and promoted. And here we took a quite unusual step. Now, typically social scientists, when they speak about promotion, they have in mind hard stuff like ranks, positions, salary raises. Economists love salary raises. But in recent years, there is also a growing attention to non-material promotion. So first and foremost, awards and decorations. Why awards? Well, and here we see a quite well-decorated guy, Leonid Brezhnev, who had more awards than his chest would be able to accommodate. And obviously, business leaders and any good organizational leaders knew for a long time that non-material incentives work quite well to motivate people. But in recent years, psychologists and behavioral economists showing one study after another that awards and recognition are actually a very powerful tool to motivate people. It's cheap, it's widely available, it doesn't cost much, but it has huge effects. Effects on individual performance. People who are awarded later on perform better. On organizational performance, it improves overall organizational performance and has pretty serious benefits for the organization, but only if done properly. It's not a risk-free strategy. If, say, people who deserve awards are overlooked, or people who are perceived by their peers as non-deserving get awarded, then it has negative effects. It decreases individual performance and it leads to a toxic environment, so it actually harms the organization. Now, most importantly, awards belong to 2 types, confirmatory and discretionary. Confirmatory awards are pretty automatic. So serve a number of years or take a part in a campaign and you get a medal. That's not what we're interested in. We are interested in what is called discretionary awards. So where the higher ups can decide who gets an award, whether they do get an award at all, when and which awards. And here, for fighter pilots, the Red Army actually had some pretty decent guidelines. So you down 5 enemy planes, you should be eligible for an award. You down 3 more, a second award. But it was non-binding and it was non-specific. So the commander could decide whether to nominate someone for an award and for which award. And the Red Army had many awards with a clear pecking order. So we could see who was nominated, when, for which award, while controlling for individual performance, the number of the German planes that this pilot supposedly downed. So we went back to the website and collected all awards that those pilots received. Here's one such award for the pilot in question. He got an Order of the Red Banner, which is the 3rd most prestigious award in the Red Army in October 1942. Now, and here is the highlighted is the line in the official document and all the data from the archive. It's not really important. Now, how the award process actually worked. First, a commander, usually a regimental commander, had to decide that a pilot deserved an award. If they decided so, then they submitted a form called award nomination. And yes, we called it all those as well. Here is this pilot's nomination. It's in Russian, so I will tell you exactly what it says. And it has some interesting stuff there. So first, it has demographic data that we already know, like the name, the rank, the unit, the award for which the person is being nominated. But it also has stuff that you will not find elsewhere, like ethnicity, or party membership status, or their status in the military. Actually, the only thing that is redacted is their home address, but no worries, we have those from other documents in the website. So if you care about privacy law for people who might still be alive, it's a nightmare. And it's all online for you to see. In some cases, it also has their social background, their class, peasant, worker, nobility, you name it. And we also know the nomination date. So we could see how many planes the pilot down, their performance at the time that they were being nominated. So for each award, we have those forms that we code. That's the first step of the process. Then this form is being submitted to higher-ups who need to approve it. And depending on the award, the higher-up might be an army commander, or it might go to Stalin himself for approval. And those higher-ups need to decide what they do with this nomination. Now, they almost never reject it completely, but they can either upgrade it to a more prestigious award or to downgrade it. And here we see exactly that. So the guy is nominated for Order of Lenin, which is the second most prestigious award in the Soviet army. But in the red handwriting and the stamp, you see that he actually gets a different award. He's being downgraded a bit.
Can I let you share it? Sorry, it's
Oh,
not sharing it with the people.
I apologize. Yeah.
So, just so that they can see.
Yes,
also.
definitely. Okay. So, okay, I apologize. So those are the forms that we were talking about. And sorry, this, no, not this one. This is the pilot that I described and his record. So I apologize for not having it on the screen. Okay, so what we did? Well, we coded all those nominations and compared them to the awards that our pilots actually received. Now, these guys were a highly decorated group. So out of our 3,000 pilots, only 19 did not get any awards, and most of them received multiple awards. So we ended up with a data set of about 10,000 awards for different pilots, and about 15% were either upgraded or downgraded. So in about 15% of the cases, the pilot received a different award from the one that he was nominated for. In about 13% of cases, much more common occurrence, the awards were downgraded. We have no idea why, it's not in the record. And in about 10% of the cases, the higher up actually upgraded the award that the person received. So, you know, for the sake of time, I won't give you the breakdown of awards. So just to come, you know, to sum up what we do, what we code here, we look at individual data like party membership, ethnicity, experience, their position and the rank. You know, the data also says whether they were wounded or whether, God forbid, they were captured by the enemy and were prisoners of war, and also some unit level data like where they were in the war, the front, the regiment type, whether it's naval aviation or air defense, and the year of nomination, because those changed quite a lot by the year. That's exactly the kind of questions that we're asking. So which awards pilots were nominated for by their immediate commanders? Which awards they received? So if the outcome changed from the nomination to the actual final outcome, whether they were nominated at all, and we'll also look at some robustness checks that I'm not going to go into right now. But if you want, I will be more than happy to talk about those during the Q&A. So, for example, close calls where the official difference between awards is very minimal, so it can reasonably go either way, or awards that have internal ranking structure. So, So what did we find? After all those introductory detail, what exactly was going on there? And what we found is a very interesting system that we came to understand as bounded meritocracy. Now, what bounded meritocracy is? It's a mixed system in which performance and merit are the key criteria, but other criteria, other factors are used strategically on the margins or when you need a pinpoint intervention. It's not either loyalty or merit as people usually position it. It's much more complicated. What it meant in practice? In practice, for aviators, Red Army was a meritocracy. You downed more planes, you are more likely to be nominated for an award, and the more planes you down, the more prestigious the award would be. Surprisingly, affiliation with the Communist Party played absolutely no role whatsoever. Zero, none, nothing. Ethnicity, however, did. And here the story gets very interesting for us. Being a minority pilot did have a negative effect at the initial nomination level. So regimental commanders were more likely to either to not nominate minority pilots at all, or when they did, they nominated them for less prestigious awards. There are several explanations for why this might have been the case. One is pure prejudice. And we actually do have some oral history data or memoirs that talk about that, how minority pilots experience, especially Muslim and Jewish pilots, experience quite a lot of prejudice in the ranks. But it might be also a reason that has nothing to do with prejudice. Because for people who gave those awards, it's also not a risk-free situation. You give an award for a wrong person and you face the consequences. So think about commanders who are by and large Russians. They know who Russians are. It's easier for them to read them and to understand their motivations. Minority pilots are less familiar. So imagine you nominate a minority pilot for an award, a very prestigious award, and then the next day he defects to the Germans. Your superiors will not be happy, I can assure you. So it's very easy to be harsh on minorities and punish or not promote minorities. But it's much harder to do with the ethnic majority group. So at the initial level of nominations, we do see ethnic discrimination of minority pilots. But interestingly, when it comes to the higher level of approval, so the level of general, the level of Stalin and beyond, that's the story where the story reverses itself. And here we clearly see ethnic affirmative action. Minority, non-Russian or non-Slavic pilots are much more likely to have their nomination upgraded and to get an award that is much more prestigious than the one they were nominated for. One possibility is that those higher up simply knew that minority pilots are facing prejudice in the rank. But there is another reason. And this reason goes back to the crux of the authoritarian dilemma. As we talked about, during wartime, the key danger for the autocrat is not a coup. They depend on mass participation of people who might have absolutely zero reason to fight and die for the regime. Now, we're talking here about the Soviet Union, but think about, for example, Sunnis in the Syrian military or Shia in the Iraqi military under Saddam. Why would those people fight for the regime? And one reason to make them fight is to create heroes. Ideological education, create role models, and there is no better role model in the society than a highly decorated co-ethnic fighter pilot. So essentially, those people were made into role models, were made into icons of bravery, and then broadcast widely to their co-ethnics in newspapers, pamphlets. They were essentially made heroes to make the other co-ethnics fight and die for the regime, because otherwise those people from the Caucasus or from the Central Asia would have no reason to do so and might even defect to the Germans. So to sum up what this all means, I think it means several things. First, non-democratic leaders are well aware of their main power constraints, not only at the elite level, but also at lower levels of the state apparatus. And they're quite determined and quite creative about fixing those problems. And from the policy perspective, understanding how authoritarian leaders deal with promotions can help us better predict the future composition of elites in those societies. So if we want to know who is likely to come up through the ranks in different authoritarian states that we might study or focus on, be it China or Burma or Syria, then knowing the mechanisms and the reason of promotions can help us do exactly that. So, and finally, to understand how those regimes operate, we need to understand not only on the formal hierarchical channels of promotion, who has which official title or who stands next to the leader during the funeral, but also look at their chests and which kind of awards they have on their chests, because those awards and those recognitions might be much more powerful markers of prestige and authority than a formal position. So I will stop here. I think I'm quite out of time. Anyway, thank you, and I will be glad to take your questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Evgeny, for a very interesting and, if I might say, innovative way of approaching the question. Why don't we just open up for questions? If well, this is a closed audience, so you don't have to say who you are.
I'm not sure what I did with the Zoom, if I did anything.
But
are we on Zoom?
we can just stop sharing, right?
Yes, thank you. You saved me.
Professor Radchenko.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have to say, I'm really impressed by how you use this.
So maybe I will just.
Which I have also used for looking at relatives and things I've never, but it does make sense to use it for this kind of congratulations on this. With regard to your presentation, I have a full question. In my mind, it seems that you would want to provide awards to those people, ethnic minorities, in order to show that nationality policies of your country, the nationality policies, is working so that they are recognized. In other words, you want to show to the almost to the outside world that you don't have racism or problems, etc. So it's not necessarily connected to this fear of them, in my mind, as much as to the idea of just promoting the nationalities policies, as it were, which you agree. And my second question is this: that's not even related to pilots whatsoever, but in 1945 or 1949, sorry, the Soviets tested their first atomic weapon. Of course, German scientists were prominently involved in developing their imported German scientists, those that were forcibly removed from their Soviet Union. And then at the end of this exercise in 1949, Bedia, who was in charge of that project, made a long list of people who were to be awarded for the Soviet atomic bomb. And so there's this long list of various people. And in the end, there's Stalin's handwriting, because when Stalin wrote down, well, what about those Germans? Why do you think Stalin wants to do that? I mean, he was not threatened by the Germans in any way. He was not even, he did not want to uphold them as an example because it was a top secret operation. Why would he do that?
So I'll take it in reverse. Or why would Stalin want to do it? So I don't know. Possibly And again, I'm speculating, not knowing the case. Maybe because they want them to develop some more stuff and to make sure that those people are not feeling alienated or overlooked. Again, hard for me to say without knowing the case. So, and that's the first time I hear this story, so we'll need to talk more about this. As for your first question, so here is you're right. Here is exactly the distinction between how things operate at the state level and how things operate on the ground. So yes, on the state level, the Soviet Union is multinational, communist state, although that changes as well during the war. But on the ground level, we see commanders who don't really want to deal with minorities because those minorities are dangerous. They might speak poor Russian, they might not share the same jokes, they might get offended when you say something about their skin color or about their ethnicity, and complain to political officers in the unit. So why deal with those people as well? So what we see, actually, not only among the pilots, but more generally, huge levels of lower level discrimination of minorities by their officers who happen to be Russians, to the point where some commanders explicitly say that they will not take anyone who is not Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian at all to their units. And that's exactly the solution. That's exactly the problem that the award issue tries to solve, to signal those people that they're still valued, that they're still respected, that they're still important, even though they know that the immediate commander nominated them for a lesser award than Russian that they fly next to. I hope that answers the question. If not, I'm sure we'll have quite a lot of conversations about that.
I can give you the scope of Stalin saying
I would love to.
Where are the Germans later on? Yeah.
I would love to. Thank you.
If I could abuse my role as chair to ask a quick couple of quick questions. First, in your estimation technique, since you've got a binary variable, are you using a logic model? Are you running regressions? I guess would be my first question. The second would be, what about the time fixed effects? Could where we're at in the war have an effect on our decision on whether or not to give awards or upgrade?
Okay, so do we want to see the regression tables?
I'd love to, but I don't know if everybody else does.
Okay, so we use several techniques. So yes, there are logic models, but most of it's actually pretty simple OLS. We use several fixed effects, year fixed effects, because it also changed throughout the war, unit level fixed effects, and also clustering standard errors for pilots.
What kind of R squares did you get, by the way?
For that, I will need to show you the regression.
Well, I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, so no, it's they're on the screen, but yes, look at that. Actually reasonably fun.
Thank you for the talk. It's really interesting. What I'm curious about is, and you may be doing this in some of your research, is this approach applicable to tank crews and also NKV? That would be very interesting to see how those people are connected, especially based on the engagements that, and as well.
Right. So what you're right. It can be applicable to different types of units. So NKVD troops. So the key issue is find clear performance indicators, right? And NKVD troops, I'm not sure what those would be, beside the number of other Soviet soldiers that they shot and killed. But again, it wouldn't be personal. The closest personal, so the closest group in terms of personal level indicators would be, as I said, snipers. And that can be done, although very few people actually cared about snipers. At that time, beyond the several top performing snipers, for the vast majority of those, there is not much in terms of data. Another thing that we're doing with data bomber crews. And to see, and here we don't have, and here the performance indicators would be just bombing sorties. So how many you fly, how many you survive would be your performance indicator. And that we're in the process of coding all the bombing crews of the Russian long-range aviation. We have all the data. We just started that. And it also will be more heterogeneous in terms of rank and in terms of ethnicity. And in terms of ethnicity, so I very much look forward to the results. I still don't have that. When I do, I will be more than happy to report. But yes, you're right. It's not, fighter pilots are the most convenient because there is so much data on them. I mean, there's the stuff of legend in most societies, unlike other groups. But yes, you can definitely apply them to other groups. All the time. Of course, yeah. We started with some simple ideas about who might get promoted just by looking at last names, for instance. So say Tsarist last names would be facing discrimination, communist last names or first names would be more, or names of heroes would be getting preferential treatments, found nothing, moved on to other stuff. We spent about a year coding all the soldiers who fought in Stalingrad. We're still coding that. And then finally figured out that we need something more tangible than just running around with millions of observations with very little to show for it. So, and we're still changing. I mean, the project is, I think it will take us about 10 years to figure it out. Just don't tell it to my coworker.
Are you doing it by hand, or are you?
No, of course not. We're hiring. So for
Other people are.
Okay, so some of that involves programmers from Moldova. Some of that involves people who are coding that by hand. Some of that, like those encyclopedias, they're actually pretty structured. So you just scan that, and then my coauthor does his data sciences magic in Python and moves it all to a data set. No way we would be able to do it by hand.
Whoever said offshoring was a bad thing was not an academic. The other comments, yeah.
Thanks so much for doing it. So I guess one of your implications of the study that you mentioned is that it's one way to kind of predict future leaders in authoritarian states. So I guess my question is, what about authoritarian countries that aren't engaged or haven't been engaged in active military conflict? Are there those kind of performance indicators that you might have thought of that aren't like particularly military context?
So that's a great question. I do think that there are some other performance indicators we might think of, for instance, for other security services, or say first responders. But our goal was more to understand, the general logic of promotion and use those specific indicators to show how it works. We don't need, if our argument is correct, we don't need to know how a specific, say, police officer or a doctor, what their specific performance indicators are, but rather knowing, say, to which group they belong and compare them to other state agents from different groups, and to understand who is being evaluated. I mean, this project and fighter pilots is of course a lot of fun to work with, but we're using them more for inference purposes rather than. I'm not a military historian, and I'm definitely not an aviation historian. They just, a case study to tell a bigger story. But I do think it applies to other cases as well. And we actually did find some preliminary evidence during COVID with, say, in African societies, which doctors were promoted or given state awards over others. It's not quantitative, and I don't know enough about those cases to say that the mechanism is actually there, but the preliminary stuff that we saw makes me think that there might be something. And if not, it's just fun research.
diversity of occupations, just really fascinating. Is it possible from this database to figure out emotions? As for example, somebody missed a feed or whatever, and correlate emotions with various characteristics.
You mean ranked emotions?
Yeah, or for example, somebody
Executions.
Or executions?
Or another interesting one is, people being sent to those
Penal units, yes. Penal units, yes. Penal battalions, yes. Yes. Actually, that was the one piece of the data that the Russian Ministry of Defense was not very keen on putting online. It's still available, but you need to go to Moscow and spend some time in the reading room of the
Moldovan researchers.
no. So I do know those for some units, but on a larger scale, they started putting some of this online as well. I have no idea why, but on a large scale, the data is there. You just need to sit in a dusty room in the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and that's it. And I haven't gotten to that yet.
Oh, you mean it's not at the military archives?
No, it's not. It's not. So part of it, it's military archives. Part of that copies are available elsewhere, like the archive of modern Russian history and some other places. But yes, it can be done.
Thank you so much for this fascinating research. It's a really good question. Because you mentioned about how party membership is identified in the honors awarded to certain individuals. But how would you put the rationale behind this kind of irrelevancy between party membership and the ranks that never were given?
Right. So to some extent, it might be an artifact of those people will be highly vetted, highly trusted group. So for those, you actually don't need to pay attention to their party membership. And that's why we also, our next steps is to code other groups which tend to have lower levels of party membership, like say bomber crews, where the pilot would probably be a party member, but you say gunner or radio operator would likely be not. So I don't know. So I don't know what we'll find there. So that might be one reason. Another reason might be that that the party ranks suggest that being a member of the party stopped being a powerful signal during war. You fight, you put the effort, you put your life on the line, and that's enough. That's loyalty enough. Actually, we do see that people who were wounded, the only effect of that, they're being protected from demotion. So their nomination either stayed the same or being upgraded, they're never demoted. That might be related, but more data we will know, more surely we will know when we code other groups.
I'll just venture one possibility. I wonder what you think about it. This notion that you're a party member, you're held to a higher standard. Therefore, almost like you don't not take this into account anyhow because you're supposed to be a higher standard in performance.
Right. Although there are different levels of party affiliation. You might be a candidate member of the party, or you might be affiliated with the youth wing of the party, the Komsomol. No effect from none of those. Like zero, none. And that we found quite surprising. I never expected that. I think it will take more than that to rehabilitate the Communist Party, frankly.
It would be interesting if there were to be a counterexample in a democracy that you could look at with that kind of a data to see if you get the same statistical results. But I don't know if that data would be available or if it really is something that just the Soviets would have produced.
I think democracies would care about privacy laws and putting that amount of information online.
You don't have award information for Vietnam War veterans?
Well, yeah, but we don't know, their political affiliation. We probably wouldn't know the. Sorry? You think we would? I mean, how would you know that from?
There weren't a lot of North Vietnamese planes to shoot down, right?
Purple Heart awardee
Possibly, we haven't done that. We haven't thought of that. But yeah, maybe this is something we should do. Okay, so
I mean, that would be a really interesting
Right.
conclusion, right? I mean, to draw that difference.
although again, we will need some individual performance indicators, and I don't want to end up with a data set full of John McCain's.
No, but that's.
No,
how
you're
would
right,
you-
yeah, it
how would
would-
you'd have to have a different, metric of some
Definitely.
sort of evaluate that. But
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, if you could do something like in Indonesia, pre and post Suharto, that would be
That's
that
interesting,
would
yeah.
be really interesting to see if you get different results
Interesting,
when it's
thank you.
in
Yeah.
the same country
Hmm.
to get it under authoritarian and
So I haven't thought of that. Thank you.
other.
Anything
questions.
online?
If we've got no more questions on this, could I ask you, since you're joining us, and again, we're delighted to have you. What other kind of research is this? Where you? This sounds like this could actually take you for this lifetime and the next. But are you doing other work as well? What are you planning on doing?
So I think this, to complete all the research that I want to do with this data set, I will need to retire in about 100 years from now. The earliest, so that's pretty much most of my time, or most of the stuff that's on my plate right now. That and another project that I couldn't present because I still haven't written out anything out of that, and that actually related to my first book about the Holocaust and how Jews chose their survival strategies. So that project looks at the next step, what happens to survivors after that, and more specifically one group of survivors who goes to Palestine and fights in the 1948 war. So how the trauma or the impact of the Holocaust affects those people. So before COVID, I spent quite a lot of time going to Israel and interviewing those survivors. I know by heart the location of almost all upscale, old people, retirement communities in the country, and the guards there know me by name and know my history. So I spent several years doing that. I think the youngest person I interviewed was 89, the oldest 96. It was quite a lot of interesting work. I haven't written anything on that because I'm still processing. I needed one more round of interviews in February 2020, and I'm still waiting for that and going to the archive. So that I put on the back burner and looked and moved to this stuff that does not require my presence on the ground beside some dusty rooms in Moscow archives, which I don't know when I will be able to get into. But yeah, World War II is by and large what, and autocracy more generally. I mean, I'm not a World War II historian. I'm more interested in how authoritarian regimes operate throughout history, and that's just one part of that.
Good. Well, again, thanks so much for this
Thank you.
presentation.
Do we
and again,
have
welcome
anything
below.
online?
Well, I put out
Ah,
a question
okay.
here. If there's any questions online, please
So if not, then
submit
no.
them. Anyone?
What about this chat thing?
Well, that's what I've been, yeah, well, that's me asking people to submit.
Okay.
Well, you're here, so they can always ask you
Exactly.
personally.
Thank you
and
so
stuff like
much.
that. So, great. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I was going to say, you might do something like